Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. This time we're going exploring the impacts of outdoor recreation on the environment.
Ooh, that's a good one.
It is a good one and kind of a scary one in a way because obviously we all love to get out there
Right.
and enjoy nature. But, I'm kind of nervous to see what we find out
Yeah.
about how much of an impact we're all having.
Yeah, for sure.
The source material for this is a chapter from an academic book that's all about this topic.
Okay.
And we're going to go through it, and I'm really curious to see what we find.
You too.
So to kick things off,
Yeah.
this chapter starts off by talking about just the sheer scale of outdoor recreation,
Yep.
which honestly is kind of mind-blowing when you look at the numbers.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good place to start for us as well.
For sure.
Did you know that participation in outdoor recreation has been steadily increasing in the U.S. every decade since 1960?
Wow.
And this trend's not even limited to the U.S. Similar patterns are happening all over the world, like in Europe and a lot of other places.
That is interesting.
So more and more people are getting out there every year,
Yeah.
hiking, camping, kayaking, you name it.
Oh,
And as we know, that can't be all good news for the environment.
right. Yeah. More people means more impact.
Exactly.
So what are some of the most popular activities?
Yeah, what are we talking about here? What are the big ones?
Well, according to this chapter, the top three are walking for pleasure,
Okay.
day hiking,
Uh-huh.
and backpacking.
No big surprises there.
Right. Those are the classics.
Yeah, for sure.
But one that's seen a huge jump in popularity is bird watching.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It seems like the advancements in camera technology have really driven that growth.
That makes sense. Like
Yeah.
better cameras, easier to capture those amazing bird photos.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easier than ever to get into bird watching.
Yeah, and it seems like a pretty low impact activity.
Right.
But I guess even with something like that, when you have more and more people doing it, it can still add up
Oh, absolutely.
to some impact on the environment.
Yeah, for sure. Even just the presence of more people in these natural spaces can have an effect.
Right, like disturbing wildlife or trampling vegetation, even if it's unintentional.
Exactly. So it's not just about the type of activity, but also the sheer number of people participating.
Okay, so we've got the classic hiking and camping, and then this rise in bird watching. What about other activities? Are there any other interesting trends happening?
Yeah, there are a few things that stood out to me.
Okay.
Hunting and fishing are actually seeing a decline.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah, you'd think with this whole, back to nature trend that those would be on the rise.
Yeah, you'd think so, but it seems like they're becoming less popular.
Interesting.
And on the flip side, challenge activities are projected to grow in the coming years.
Like what kind of challenge activities are we talking about?
Things like rock climbing and mountain biking and those sorts of more adventurous pursuits.
Oh, okay, so that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
People are looking for more of a thrill.
Right, exactly.
And those are definitely activities that can have a bigger impact on the environment.
Yeah, for sure, especially if they're not done responsibly.
Right.
And then a couple of others. Cross-country skiing is still really popular in certain regions, and geocaching is on the rise.
Geocaching. What's that?
Oh, it's like a modern-day treasure hunt using GPS coordinates.
Oh, that sounds kind of fun.
It is, actually. It's a really cool way to explore new places.
Yeah.
But the point is, all of these activities, regardless of how popular they are,
Yeah.
they all have some level of impact on the environment.
Okay, so we've established that more people than ever are getting out there and enjoying these activities.
Right.
And that's great. We don't want to discourage people from experiencing nature,
Of course not.
but we also need to be realistic about the fact that
Yeah.
it does have consequences.
Exactly.
Eh.
Even something as simple as walking can leave a footprint.
So how does this chapter actually address that? Like, how does it talk about those impacts?
Well, it starts by emphasizing that all outdoor activities,
Yeah.
even the ones that seem really low impact, they all lead to some degree of environmental change.
Okay.
And a lot of the early research on this topic
Yeah.
focused on those really obvious impacts that you can easily see,
Okay.
like trampling
Mm-hmm.
and the loss of vegetation.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of damage that's hard to miss.
Exactly. It's the most visible.
Yeah.
But it's not always a simple equation.
What do you mean?
Well, I think a lot of people assume that more people automatically equals more damage.
Yeah.
But it's actually more complicated than that.
Okay.
Oh,
Now
no.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So researchers used to think there was like a straightforward relationship between how much an area was used
Uh-huh.
and how severe the impact was.
Okay.
So the idea was that the initial use would cause a lot of damage,
Yeah.
and then it would sort of level off.
Okay.
But newer research is showing that it's not that simple.
Really? So
Right.
what are they finding instead?
Well, it turns out that the relationship between impact and use
Yeah.
is much more complex.
Okay.
Different environments respond in different ways.
Uh-huh.
And some activities can have cascading effects that we didn't initially understand.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so for instance, trampling on those delicate cryptogrammic crusts.
Do what?
Cryptogrammic crusts, they're those living soil crusts you see a lot in deserts.
Oh, okay.
They're super fragile.
Yeah.
And when you trample on them, it has a much more severe impact than, say, trampling on grasslands.
Which are more resilient.
Exactly. They can bounce back much easier.
Interesting.
So the location and the specific ecosystem play a huge role in how much damage occurs.
So is that what they mean by a stress response curve?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's basically a way of measuring how an ecosystem responds to different levels of stress or impact.
Okay. And the research is showing that these curves can look very different depending on the environment.
Exactly. So managing for impact isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right. It's not like you can just apply the same rules everywhere.
Right.
And expect the same results.
Exactly. What works in one place might be totally inappropriate in another.
That makes sense.
So we need strategies that are tailored to the specific environment and the specific activities that are happening there.
Okay. I'm starting to see how complicated this can get.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's not just about telling people to stay on the trails.
Right. It's much more nuanced than that.
And it sounds like this creates a lot of challenges for the people who are actually managing these lands.
Oh, absolutely. They're tasked with balancing recreation with conservation goals.
Yeah, trying to allow people to enjoy these spaces while also protecting them for the future.
Exactly. It's a tough job.
So are there any specific examples from the chapter about how they're trying to manage these impacts?
Yeah, they talk about the need to shift from decisions that are based on limited evidence or just tradition to decisions that are based on actual scientific research.
Okay, so like using data and studies to inform their management strategies.
Exactly. They need to understand the science behind how these ecosystems work.
Yeah.
And how they're being affected by different activities.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they discuss something called a limits of acceptable change management system.
Limits of acceptable change.
Yeah, it's kind of a mouthful, but it's basically about setting boundaries.
So instead of trying to prevent all impact,
Right.
it's more about figuring out what level of impact is acceptable for a given ecosystem.
Exactly. And then managing activities accordingly.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's kind of a shift in mindset from this idea of pristine wilderness that needs to be completely untouched
Right.
to a more realistic approach that recognizes that some impact is inevitable.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where people can enjoy these spaces without loving them to death.
I like that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways that they actually go about setting those limits and managing activities?
Well, there are a bunch of different strategies. One of the most important ones is educating visitors about responsible behavior.
Okay, so like teaching people how to minimize their impact.
Exactly. Things like staying on designated trails, packing out all your trash.
Leave no trace.
Exactly. Leave no trace.
Yeah, I try to follow that myself whenever I'm out there.
Good.
What are some other ways?
Well, sometimes they try to use patterns to more durable locations.
Okay, so like encouraging people to visit areas that can handle more traffic.
Exactly. And they might implement quotas or restrictions in those really sensitive areas.
Okay, so like limiting the number of people who can visit a certain place at a given time.
Right. Or maybe even closing certain areas off completely during certain seasons.
Yeah, like during breeding season or something like that.
Exactly. It's all about protecting those vulnerable resources.
Right.
And sometimes they'll even use marketing.
Marketing?
Yeah, to try to steer people towards specific areas that are better equiped to handle higher traffic.
So it's kind of like strategically concentrating use in certain areas.
Yeah.
To protect the more vulnerable ones.
They call these honeypot sites.
Honeypot sites?
Yeah. They're designed to attract visitors and kind of keep them contained.
Okay, so it's like giving people an awesome experience
Right.
while also minimizing damage elsewhere.
Exactly.
I like that.
Yeah. And they also do things like hardening trails and campsites.
What does that mean?
So like using more durable materials or building structures that can withstand more wear and tear.
Okay, so it's kind of like making those high-use areas more resilient.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's all about finding that balance
Yeah.
between allowing people to enjoy the outdoors and protecting these incredible natural spaces.
It sounds like a constant balancing act.
It is, and it raises a lot of questions about our relationship with nature
Yeah?
and what we even consider natural in a world that's constantly changing.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah, we'll have to delve into that more later.
Definitely. But before we get into that whole philosophical debate, I want to dig into some specific activities and how they're impacting the environment.
For sure.
Like we were talking about trampling and how sensitive those desert crusts are.
Right.
Where else does that become an issue?
Well, alpine areas are a big concern too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Right.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that.
So alpine areas, those high elevation environments, they often have really slow-growing vegetation
Okay.
and these fragile soils
Yeah.
that are super easily damaged
Yeah.
by heavy foot traffic.
Right. Those alpine areas, they always feel so pristine.
They do.
You wouldn't think that just a few footsteps would make that much of a difference.
Yeah, you'd think they could handle it, but
But they can't.
not always.
So it's not just the number of people then?
No, it's also about how they behave.
Okay. So like what they do when they're out there.
Exactly. The chapter mentions that even seemingly small actions, like straying from the trail or cutting switchbacks, those can have a surprisingly big impact.
Especially when you think about it cumulatively.
Exactly. It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. It all adds up.
So that's where education and personal responsibility come in.
Right. If people understand the impact they're having, they're more likely to make good choices.
Exactly.
Like staying on the trail, respecting closures, being mindful of where they camp.
All of that helps.
So knowing better really does lead to doing better.
I think so.
Okay, so we've talked about hiking, but this isn't just about hiking, right?
No, of course not.
What about other activities like horseback riding?
Yeah, that's one they mentioned specifically.
Okay.
Horseback riding can be really hard on trails and vegetation.
Especially when horses are allowed to go off trail.
Exactly.
I can imagine their hooves would really churn things up.
Oh, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
They compact the soil, which makes it harder for plants to grow.
Okay.
And they can also contribute to erosion, especially on steep slopes.
Yeah, it's not the same as a hiker walking through. And then, of course, you have off-road vehicles.
Yeah.
Which I imagine have an even bigger impact.
They can, for sure. Things like ATVs and dirt bikes. They create ruts. They damage vegetation. They disturb wildlife.
And a lot of noise.
Yeah, a ton of noise pollution.
Which I guess is another kind of impact.
It disrupts the peace of these natural areas.
And probably stresses out the animals.
Definitely. So those types of activities, they really need careful management and regulation.
To minimize their footprint.
Exactly. In some cases, restrictions or even prohibitions might be necessary.
Right, especially in sensitive areas.
Yeah, it's always about finding that balance.
That balance between recreation and preservation.
And speaking of challenges, we can't forget about climate change.
Oh, right. That's the big elephant in the room.
It's looming over all of this.
So how does climate change factor into all of this?
Well, it's already affecting outdoor recreation in a bunch of ways.
Okay.
Warmer temperatures are leading to shorter winters and less snowpack.
Which obviously has implications for skiing and snowboarding.
Huge implications for those winter sports.
Yeah. I've heard about ski resorts having to make their own snow now.
Oh, yeah, they are.
Which uses a ton of energy and resources.
It's not ideal.
No, not at all.
And then you have rising sea levels and coastal erosion.
Right.
Which are threatening beaches and other coastal recreation areas.
It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It's a stark reminder that climate change isn't just some far-off threat.
Yeah.
It's happening now, and it's affecting the places we love.
And with more and more people getting into outdoor recreation?
These challenges are only going to get more intense.
So what can we do about it?
Well, this chapter stresses that we need to rethink some of our old management strategies.
Like what kind of strategies?
Well, in the past, we've often focused on just confining use to designated areas. And assuming that everything else will be fine.
But as we've seen, that's not always enough.
No, it's not. We need a more holistic approach. One that considers the specific vulnerabilities of different ecosystems.
Yeah.
And the combined impact of all the activities that are happening within them.
So looking at the big picture instead of just focusing on isolated areas.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this requires collaboration.
Between who?
Between land managers, scientists, and the recreation community.
So we all need to work together.
We do. We need to develop sustainable strategies that allow people to enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah.
Without compromising these beautiful places.
It's a big challenge.
It is.
But it's inspiring to see so many people working towards solutions.
It is. There's a real shift happening in how we think about our relationship with nature.
Yeah, it feels like there's a growing awareness that enjoying the outdoors comes with a responsibility to protect it.
Exactly. We need to be mindful not just of our own enjoyment, but also the long-term health of these ecosystems.
And the communities that depend on them.
Exactly. It's all connected.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this interconnected web, and our actions have ripple effects.
They do. Even small changes can make a big difference.
Especially when we all do them together.
Exactly.
So what are some things that individuals can do to minimize their impact and contribute to a more sustainable future for these wild spaces?
Well, first and foremost, education is key.
Okay, so like learning about the specific impacts of the activities you enjoy.
Exactly. And the places you visit.
Okay. Where can people find that information?
There are tons of great resources available online.
Okay.
From organizations like Leave No Trace, the National Park Service.
Okay.
They offer practical tips and guidelines for minimizing your footprint.
That's a great place to start. What else?
Think about your gear and how you use it.
Okay.
Choose durable, eco-friendly products whenever possible.
Yeah.
Always pack out everything you pack in.
Including trash and food scraps.
Everything.
Right. Leave no trace.
Exactly. And be mindful of wildlife. Observe from a distance, avoid disturbing nests or dens, and keep pets under control.
It all comes back to that leave no trace principle.
It does. It's a good one to remember.
Yeah, for sure. And if an area is closed or looks particularly fragile, respect those boundaries.
Always better to err on the side of caution.
So it sounds like it all boils down to being informed, prepared, and respectful.
I think so.
And I guess we can all support organizations that are working to protect and restore these natural areas.
Absolutely, whether it's through volunteering, donating, or just spreading awareness.
Yeah, every little bit helps.
It does.
I love that it's a reminder that we can all be part of the solution.
We can.
Protecting nature isn't just about preserving beautiful landscapes.
No.
It's about protecting the human spirit that thrives on those connections.
Beautifully said. And that leads us perfectly to the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Where we'll explore some of the broader implications of managing for sustainable recreation.
Okay.
In a changing world.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about like the science and the practical side of managing outdoor recreation.
Right.
But it feels like there's this bigger conversation here.
Yeah.
About our values and how we view our relationship with nature.
I agree. The ethical dimension of all of this is really important.
Yeah, it's not just about minimizing our physical impact.
Right.
It's about responsibility and respect. And recognizing that our actions have these far-reaching consequences.
Exactly.
So what are some of those ethical considerations that come into play when we talk about outdoor recreation?
Well, one of the big ones that this chapter highlights is the question of equity and access.
Okay. Yeah, that's huge.
As outdoor recreation becomes more popular, we need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to experience and benefit from these spaces.
Right. It's not just a playground for the privileged.
Exactly. We need to make sure that these spaces are accessible to everyone.
Regardless of their background or circumstances.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that leave no trace message.
Right.
And forget that not everyone has equal access to begin with.
Absolutely.
So how do we address that?
Well, we need to think about ways to make outdoor recreation more inclusive.
Okay.
And that might mean addressing things like transportation.
Okay.
Offering affordable gear rentals or creating trails and facilities that are accessible to people with disabilities.
Yeah, and it goes beyond just physical access too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's also about creating a welcoming and inclusive environment for people of all backgrounds and cultures.
For sure. We need to challenge the historical and ongoing exclusion of certain groups from outdoor spaces and work towards a more diverse and equitable outdoor community.
I love that. So equity and access are huge pieces of the puzzle.
They are.
What other ethical considerations should we be thinking about?
Our responsibility to future generations is a big one.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
The decisions we make today about how we manage these areas are going to have a lasting impact on the experiences of those who come after us.
It's about thinking long-term, being good stewards, and making choices that protect these places for the future, even if it means making some sacrifices in the present.
Exactly. Yeah. We need to be willing to prioritize conservation over convenience.
Yeah.
And advocate for policies that safeguard these natural treasures for generations to come.
It also strikes me that our relationship with nature is constantly evolving.
It is.
We need to be flexible and open to new ways of thinking and interacting with the environment.
I completely agree. As we learn more about the impacts of certain activities, we may need to adapt how, when, and where we engage in them.
So maybe that means choosing a less impacted trail, or opting for a walk in a local park instead of driving hours to a crowded national park.
Right.
Or exploring activities like bird watching or nature photography that have a lighter footprint.
Exactly. It's about expanding our definition of what it means to enjoy and connect with nature.
I love that. And I think there's a responsibility to stay informed.
Absolutely.
And engage in these conversations thoughtfully.
Yeah.
And resist getting overwhelmed by the challenges.
It's easy to get discouraged.
It is. But we need to stay hopeful.
Yes.
And keep pushing for solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to remember that even small actions can make a difference.
Especially when we all do them together.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect.
No.
It's about being mindful and intentional in our choices.
I love that it's about recognizing that our relationship with nature is reciprocal. We benefit so much from these spaces.
We do.
And we have a responsibility to give back to care for them and ensure their well-being.
Beautifully said.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the impacts of outdoor recreation, I think the key takeaway is that our love for nature needs to be matched by a commitment to protect it.
Well said. It's a journey we all need to take together with open minds, open hearts, and a willingness to make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
We'll see you next time.